did you want to do before you became a Beatle?
Nothing really. I just wanted to be rich, you see. But I wanted to be a Beatle mainly.
But what do you define as a Beatle?
That's what we are, you know. A group singing and selling records. That's what I wanted to do.
Well, shake it up, baby. Shake it up, baby. Twist and shout. Twist and shout. Come on, baby. Come on and work it on out.
John Lennon was the kind of the heart and soul of the Beatles, really. Kind of like a rock-like figure. Very strong personality.
He wasn't as deep as anybody thinks he is. He was short-sighted, and he was embarrassed about that. He was embarrassed as well because he used to have this weight fluctuation thing, which used to sort of... No, but to know him, he was a treasure. If you got to know him and he got to know you, he was wonderful.
To get 10, 15 or 20 minutes with John Lennon was quite a coup. As my memory of him was being very businesslike, down to earth, and just a little bit sharp.
He would always find somebody's little foible, and he wouldn't know when he'd got it and sort of use it on them, if he felt like it. If he didn't, he didn't. But he was a great fun to go out with, and he was a wonderful rock and roll singer.
John Lennon was probably the one that would introduce the more interesting local content, because he liked wordplay. That's what he was interested in. Whereas McCartney, generally speaking, was a little simpler in his lyrics, and George Harrison would either be quite bizarre in his lyrics or straightforward love songs. But therefore you got a huge cross-section of lyrics, and none of them were boy-girl songs. You know, they all had a bit more depth to them.
Let me take you down, 'cause I'm going to strawberry fields. Nothing is real, nothing to get hung about. Strawberry fields forever. Strawberry fields forever. Strawberry fields forever.
One of the crucial things that Lennon had was a sort of single-minded approach to try and achieve that sort of vision. Now, that can lead to a sort of arrogance, I suppose, and I think that's one of the things that a lot of people have commented on about encounters with Lennon. But you can't really achieve a vision without some of that, I think. It's an inevitable aspect of it. And the other side of that is the sort of fragility that he didn't... He was probably never really convinced that he'd got it right. And in a way, maybe that balances the arrogance and sort of makes it acceptable.
Imagine all the people living for today.
He knew he was perfect. I'm John Lennon. What are you? I mean, he did have a big job to be all of those things to all those people.
Love, love me do. You know I love you. I'll always be true. So please, love me do.
The Beatles' first thing was Love Me Do, which, if you actually go back and listen to the original tapes, it's actually quite a funky little song. It didn't sound very funky on the record when it came out. But I've spoken to quite a few people who were around at the time who remember hearing it and going, oh, the Beatles, they're an R&B band, and being quite shocked by how raucous and sort of rough it sounded compared to the other things that were coming out of England at that time.
That really revolutionised pop music because there was something so basic and simple and honest about this wonderful sound, Love Me Do, blasting from the jukebox, compared to, say, all the Tin Pan Alley songs that you were used to hearing, or even the old style rock and roll tunes.
Love, love me do. You know I love you. I'll always be true. So please, love me do. Whoa, love me do.
That was very influenced by Hey Baby, the Bruce Chanel hit, particularly the harmonica passages by Delbert McClintock. And in fact, the Beatles appeared with Bruce Chanel at the Tower Ballroom in New Brighton. And John went up to them, and Delbert spent 15 minutes showing him how to do the harmonica solo, which he did on Love Me Do. So that is the big influence. If you hear both records, you hear this harmonica thing. And I believe John played it with the harmonica he stole when they went over to the continent.
This haunting sound of the harmonica and the vocal harmonies, and a very original sounding song. It was all unusual, it was different. And it worked so well that the record shot up to the charts. It was number 17 in a matter of weeks. So really that was a kind of pivotal moment, and Love Me Do was the kind of key to unlocking the Beatles' magic, I think.
Love, love me do. You know I love you. I'll always be true. So please, love me do.
In 1963, nobody particularly cared about albums. It was a very small market, mostly aimed at adults who could afford these very expensive records. I mean, as far as kids were concerned, they used to have to save up to buy a single, never mind an album. So really, it was just a way for the record company to make a bit of extra money, and for the performers as well. So there was no great thought that went into it whatsoever. It really was just a question of getting as many songs onto tape as quickly as possible and getting another record into the shops to capitalise on the success of the single.
I mean, one thing you have to understand about the way the Beatles worked is, like, Please Please Me came out, second single, big hit. EMI tells them, oh, make an album then. And how long have they got to make the album? 12 hours. Easy. You can do an album in 12 hours, can't you? And they did. So the Please Please Me album was made at about a song an hour, which is just astonishing compared to the way bands work today.
Well, shake it up, baby. Shake it up, baby. Twist and shout. Twist and shout. Come on, baby. Come on, baby. Come on and work it on out. Work it on out. Work it on out. You know you look so good. Look so good. You know you got me going. Got me going just like I knew you would. Like I knew you would.
We then did their first album, which we finished up doing in one day. That was 3 sessions, 10 to 1, 2 to 5, 7 till 10, in one day, 13 tracks. And I always remember the last track was going to be Twist and Shout, which John Lennon was going to sing. Well, by that time, his voice was pretty shattered. And he could barely talk properly. And so I thought, well, I've got to get this in one take. So I better not, mess things up. So anyway, we did. We got it in one take. Because I don't think he could have done take 2. We did it in one take.
In England, few people had heard the originals by groups like the Isley Brothers or the Shirelles. They were popular with musicians, but the general public hadn't really heard those original versions, so it was an introduction to a new kind of music. So the Beatles and later the Stones, of course, pioneered interest in the bluesier, more soulful American bands. Otherwise wouldn't have had their records played on the radio. So when we heard those songs for the first time by the Beatles, they sounded fantastic. And to be honest, I think in many ways the Beatles versions are actually in some ways better than the originals. They had that earthiness, that kind of Mersey beat sort of drive to them.
It's one of John Lennon's finest vocals, the actual record. On stage, it was the great rabble-rouser. It was an enormous climax in lots of ways. I think for the audience, it was the one that got the girls really, really excited. The Beatles jerked around on stage as they performed it in a very convulsive kind of manner. And it brought all sorts of illicit longings to the loins of their fans, I think.
You heard a lot of their tracks all over the place on the radio. They had their radio show pretty soon. Can't remember exactly when that started, but it was a great thing. You'd rush home from school to hear their half-hour show on the radio. Imagine that, you know, one night a week, every Wednesday or something, come home, there's half an hour of the Beatles live on the radio. So you heard a lot of their material. They became so popular so quickly. However, She Loves You, the general rush of that, I love. But what always got me, personally, was those harmonies, and She Loves You has some of their greatest sort of explosions of harmony, and the very famous last chord of it. But it's what's making that music dense and passionate all the time.
It's the first sort of million seller that was, and in fact it was the biggest selling single in Britain of all time until Mull of Kintyre.
Every chance they had, whether it was on the coach between gigs, in the van between gigs, in the hotel room, in the mornings or after gigs, they would sit in with a pair of acoustic guitars, or if there was a piano around, clank them out. You know, John and Paul had this thing of being, if we're going to do this, we'll be professional songwriters, not just sort of. If the beat bubble ever burst, they wanted to be in Tin Pan Alley, sort of. You know, oh, Frank Sinatra needs a song, so Bucks and Cox down in Tin Pan Alley. That would be them, sort of in the garret, writing songs for people.
Now, yesterday and today, our theater's been jammed with newspapermen and hundreds of photographers from all over the nation, and these veterans agree with me that the city never has witnessed the excitement stirred by these youngsters from Liverpool who call themselves the Beatles. Now, tonight, you're going to twice be entertained by them. Right now, and again in the second half of our show. Ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles!
The cracking of America was achieved with contributions from a number of different sources. Undoubtedly, the fact that 73 million people watched the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show, which was parallel, I suppose, with the London Palladium television show, Sunday night at the London Palladium. For the Americans, it was the Ed Sullivan Show on a Sunday night, and with an audience of 73 million, a record-breaking number for the Beatles' appearance. Now, you can't ignore that, and that was a Sunday night audience, not a children's hour audience, if you like, not a kids' television audience. Therefore, for the first time, the Beatles were exposed in America not only to their fans, their millions of fans, but also to the parents of those fans, the older generations who actually accepted the Beatles, partly because of the credentials of the Ed Sullivan Show. If they're fit for Ed Sullivan, they're good enough for us.
This came about with a guy called Sid Bernstein, actually, who is still alive and was over here last year. I know him. And he used to buy the Times newspaper, really to see things. He'd never been to England, just to catch up with what was going on in England, news-wise. And he saw a small piece about this band, the Beatles. And he got onto the case and he rang Brian Epstein to bring them over to America, and that's when they appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show.
Oh yeah, tell me something, I think you'll understand when I say that something. I wanna hold your hand, I wanna hold your hand, I wanna hold your hand.
I Wanna Hold Your Hand is iconic. That is the Beatles number that became the biggest in America. This is what started them in America, you know. And this is the record that they were first told when they were in Paris, you've just come #1 in the American charts. And the whole of America fell in love with them, you know, and it was such an upbeat, happy song just a couple of months after President Kennedy had been assassinated and America had been in mourning, and suddenly they had something to smile about with the Beatles and this particular number. And I think it is iconic, will always be remembered, and I think with Americans, they'll always think of that particular number.
Yeah, you got that something, I think you'll understand when I hear that something. I wanna hold your hand, I wanna hold your hand, I wanna hold your hand. And when I touch you, I feel happy inside. It's such a feeling that my love I can hide, I can hide, I can hide. Yeah, you.
Their success in the States wasn't immediate. I mean, their singles had been released in the States before to very little impact, I mean, roughly sort of impact of, you know, feather on concrete, I suppose. But I Wanna Hold Your Hand somehow caught the movie out, caught the lightning, and that's really what made them. And you know, within weeks, I mean, 9 Beatle records were in the Canadian top 10, for example, and you know, and 5 Beatles records occupied the US top 5. You know, and once again, it was a repeat of what had happened in Britain. In anything to do with the Beatles was a guaranteed seller.
All of us on the show want to express our deep appreciation to the New York Police Department for its superb handling of thousands of youngsters who flooded Broadway at 53rd Street, ready to greet the Beatles under the command of Deputy Chief Sanford Garrow. And our deep appreciation to the newspapermen, magazine writers and photographers who've been so darn kind to the Beatles and to us.
On the part of Capitol Records, there was also undoubtedly unusual promotional expenditure in their way. They were prepared to sort of spend money. They produced all kinds of gimmicky things like Beatles wigs. They had their executives going around the place in Beatles wigs and waving flags and posters and so forth. And they certainly provided posters and banners for the kids to wave at the airport at New York when the Beatles first arrived in February '64. Yeah, they did. So it's a concentrated effort from all aspects, but it was all directed at different parts of the market, and that's what was crucial. Normally, a rock and roll campaign would have concentrated purely on the teeny bop magazines, probably. We concentrated on the widest possible range, from the most sophisticated magazines and newspapers across the board down to the teeny bop fanzines.
You don't need me to show the way. Why do I always have to say that? Come on, 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 please, 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 oh yeah, I got please you. I don't wanna stand complaining, but you know there's always rain in my heart, in my heart. I don't wanna please with you, it's so hard to reason with you.
I think the American image of English people at that time was the bowler hats and the umbrella type of guy, you know. So suddenly these guys come along here, and and they also had the idea that people had clipped English, you know, very well-spoken people, probably like Brian Epstein. And these four guys come off a plane, you know, or whatever, with their mop-top heads, which these days doesn't seem outrageous, it doesn't seem that long, but it was then, with their different accent, with the Liverpool accent. They really encountered that before, and cracking jokes, you know, sort of stuff, doing one-off comments. So they were, I think the Americans were just blown over by it and fascinated by it. And then they heard their music, and that was it really. So it was a combination of all those things. Because they had been used really, apart from, I mean, they had people like Bill Haley, Rock Around the Clock, but he was then a guy of 30, which was quite old for teenagers, and he had his Kiss Curl, and there's Elvis, but Elvis had gone in the army, and he was a fairly clean-cut sort of guy, wasn't he? But then these guys come along, the Beatles, and that was it.
It's been a hard day's night, and I've been working like a dog. It's been a hard day's night, I should be sleeping like a log. But when I get home to you, I find the things that you do will make me feel alright. You know I work all day to get your money to buy a thing, and it's worth it just to hear you say you're gonna give me everything.
A Hard Day's Night was some sort of highlight of the early years because every track was written by Lennon and McCartney, and they were all strong numbers. Also, they were quite unusual. I mean, for example, the final track, I'll Be Back, which wasn't in the film, the harmonies wander all over the place. I mean, and it doesn't seem to have a standard sort of verse-chorus pattern at all. And I think they were actually trying to extend the boundaries of the common pop song.
And the maturity of the songwriting within the very sort of narrow pop, I love you, you love me kind of format they were working. They very, very complex harmonies, interesting chord changes, just fantastically professional songwriting all the way through. I think in lots of ways the most interesting thing about that record is the fact that it's completely dominated by John. I think almost for the last time on any Beatles record he wrote more songs than Paul did. So I think 13, 14 songs, and John wrote about 10 of them. Amazing sort of purple patch for him.
Well, at the time, in 1964, I thought it was a brilliant film. Now, when I see it today, you know, I can see, you know, it does seem to probably a teenager now somewhat dated. But, you know, it was a film of its time, and to me, it summed up the Beatles' early career, because it's almost... it's on the train and it's following them around into concerts, isn't it? It's almost what they were actually doing, you know, in real life as the Beatles.
Ready, John? As soon as we draw, open that door and straight in.
It was just that constant being chased. It was never sitting down for a minute of peace, just and being bullied into doing things. Yes, bullied into doing things they didn't always want to do. They did have their limits of how much they would commercialise themselves. But it was like a sort of fly on the wall look at, slightly over exaggerated in places as to what it was like, but the idea of constantly running, jumping and standing still was what it was like.
Tell me, how did you find America?
So I left to Greenland.
Has success changed your life?
Yes.
I'd like to keep Britain tidy.
Are you a mod or a rocker?
No, I'm a mocker.
Have you any hobbies?
They'd been through a year of madness before they got famous. They'd already been through a lot of madness, their times in Hamburg and so on, you know. They'd lived, they'd been around, they'd had hard times, they'd had near starvation times, all of that. That was in the mix with what they were putting across. But it also expressed something which they weren't saying was she loves you, I want to hold your hand. It's been a hard day's night. Suddenly, these are men who've been around the block, and that's what it says immediately.
I think if you went and met the Beatles at that point, you would have thought they were John Lennon's band, because the others all looked to him when they were making a decision. They'd all say, is that okay? In PR terms, Paul was the one who would smile and greet you, whereas John would just tell you where to go, probably. But he was certainly he was the oldest of the original three. He was 2 years older than Paul, which, you know, when you're in your early 20s is important, I think, still. And he had a dominating personality. And at that point, he was still full of creative energy. I think it was only later on, when he started to sag, that Paul had to pick up the creative energy and more or less took over leadership of the band, whether the others liked it or not.
Who selected the name the Beatles, and how did you derive this particular name with the BEA instead of
John
Beatley?
got the name Beatles
in a
ages ago. You know, when we needed a name and everybody was thinking of a name, and he thought of Beatles.
Why the BEA instead of the BE?
Well, actually, you know.
Well, you know, if they left it with BEE, it was hard enough getting people to understand why it was BEA, never mind.
John, has the Mersey beat changed since you've been playing it?
Oh, we still keep on saying there's no such thing as Mersey beat. It's something the press made up, you know.
Well,
we call it
you
rock
play
and
the same
roll.
way now as you did?
Just rock and roll, just so happens we write most of it.
There was always this sense that it wasn't going to last. It was always a sense that, you know, that something was going to happen. You know, pop groups aren't, by their very definition, aren't meant to last anyway. And so, you know, I think they were actually making contingency plans for the future, you know, a future in which the Beatles weren't going to be as popular as they were then. But of course, you know, it went far beyond that. You know, the thing is that, I mean, even today, I mean, the Beatles are still very much a viable market force.
She thinks of him, and so she dresses in black. Now he'll never come back. She's dressed in black. Oh dear, what can I do? Baby's in black, and I'm feeling blue.
On and on we go, aren't we, with the progression thing. The difference with this album, of course, is it folds out, doesn't it? The first one that did this, you see. This album has been criticised as one of their weakest albums. I don't know why, because I think there's some great tracks on this one, and I think we can see the natural progression they are making. You know, we're now on album 4.
The Beatles' Sail was the work of a group that was becoming tired. After the previous album, A Hard Day's Night, every track was a Lennon McCartney original. By the time Beatles for Sale came out, they'd fallen back very much on their old sort of Hamburg, Liverpool repertoire, you know, old-time rock and roll. Although there were some classic songs on it, like, you know, 8 Days a Week or I'm a Loser. But that isn't to say that it's a bad album. It's nothing, you know, you can't dismiss it as some sort of holding operation. I think it's a very strong album, but I mean, they look tired on the cover, and I think that, you know, it's to do with this sort of relentless touring schedule that had been, you know, unbroken since the beginning of 1963.
Teenage Youth Club anthems, weren't they, the early songs? And then as they became perhaps more world-weary, I suppose, really, and they're thinking all the pressures and the people they meet, and getting out of Liverpool and meeting a wider world, I suppose they would become more worldly and sophisticated. Certainly they were very grown-up adult people, and that was reflected in their songwriting.
I need somebody help, not just anybody help. You know I need someone. When I was younger than today, I never needed anybody's help in any way. And now these days are gone, I'm so self-assured. And now I finally changed my mind and opened up the door.
We're going from a situation, and the same thing happened with Elvis Presley, that their lives were not their own anymore. That had gone. That had completely gone. They could not do things. You see, there was always pause, especially I think of John and George, and probably Ringo, less so Paul, that whilst they loved being Beatles and all the fame that that brought with it, they still would have loved to have gone down to the local pub and had a pint and not be, not particularly be recognised.
Okay, who let it out? Oh, dear, no. We're not going there. We just put it round, we're going there. We're not going there. We just put it round, we're going there. Just so everybody would think we were going there.
I'd like to go there.
You wouldn't like it.
Where are we going then?
Never you mind.
Obviously, it's one that Lennon led the writing of, though I'm sure McCartney helped and so on. And he says that it was, he decided to just, in that urgency, in that practical urgency, he just decided to pour out his inner panic, basically, about what was happening to them. You know, that harum-scarum, helter-skelter life they were living at the time, you know, which was, they were obviously strong people who could support one another and had good people around them like George Martin and Lester, and Brian Epstein, of course. But at the same time, it was an experience that very few human beings had gone through up to that time, you know, Elvis being one of the few.
I love Help, yes. When the first time I heard it, I thought it's the whole complexity of the melody is so great, you know, and I thought, well, this is the development we're hearing, that they're just getting better and better.
In terms of the language, Help is a bit of an evolution. It's using words, not terribly academic words or anything, but just words that he wouldn't have used before. I'm not so self-assured. It's not a pop song word at the time. My independence seems to vanish in the haze. You know, so there's words and ideas coming in there that are definitely an evolution of what went before. They didn't jar with us teenagers at the time. It seemed entirely natural. It's not like it's baffling us with science or anything, but there definitely is a growth in the range of ideas and emotions that are being dealt with, and that is partly expressed by a slight change in the vocabulary they're using.
Remember now it's more, there's John writing and there's Paul writing, and there, you know, you can begin to tell who wrote which, you know. And of course we reach the time where John gets very much influenced by Bob Dylan, and he begins to write introspective songs like Help, and begins to explore his own feelings in song, which he hadn't done before.
I suppose the most traumatic occasion, from my point of view, in the 6 years that I was with the Beatles as their PR, concerned again, John and his outspoken interview with the London Evening Standard's Maureen Cleave. And John, at one point in the conversation, talking generally about religion and social circumstances of the era, made the remark, the Beatles are more popular than Jesus now. He didn't say bigger. An awful lot of people have misquoted that, him saying in a boastful kind of a way, we're bigger than Jesus now. He didn't say that. He said we are more popular, and by this he meant that more people were going down to the local Empire theatres or the ABC cinemas to see concerts by the Beatles than were going to their local church or chapel or whatever to worship God, worship Jesus Christ. It raised no eyebrows at all, but I guess silent nods of approval amongst the readership. Certainly it didn't startle me as the group's PR in any way. It didn't worry me greatly, and in fact I've never talked about this before, but I can say that I was actually directly instrumental in helping to get that story reproduced in America, which became the cause of a massive furor where Beatles albums were burned. There was a threat that the whole of the tour that year of America would be called off.
This is Doug Layton and Tommy Charles reminding you that our fantastic Beatle boycott is still in effect. Don't you forget what the Beatles have said.
And don't forget to take your Beatle records and your Beatle paraphernalia to any one of our 14 pickup points in Birmingham, Alabama.
The Beatles for a long time have been able to, because of their tremendous popularity throughout the world, especially with the younger set, have been able to say whatever they wanted to without any regard for judgment or maturity or the wisdom of it. And no one yet has challenged them to any tremendous degree where it might count.
I remember seeing John Lennon beforehand. It was my job to kind of prepare him for this very unusually serious press conference which we were holding on the eve of the tour in Chicago, at which the world's press would be represented, and they were there for one purpose, not for a light-hearted show business style party come press conference at all, but a very serious interrogation type press conference where they would be all sort of saying, John, you've got to apologise, you've insulted the church, etc. And I remember sitting in Brian Epstein's hotel suite with John, and John was saying, I will say whatever you tell me I should be saying. I'll say what I don't feel I have to apologise, should apologise. I've said nothing blasphemous or intentionally blasphemous, but I will say whatever you want me to say. And at one point during our conversation, John was sitting there most uncharacteristically with his head actually cupped it down in his hands, and he was sobbing. He was weeping away, not at the prospect of the press conference itself so much as the fact that he realised that if he didn't get it all right, that the tour might be cancelled, he might be letting down the group.
The Beatle boycott is still in effect. We haven't forgotten what the Beatles said.
We meant more to kids than Jesus did, or religion at that time. I wasn't knocking it or putting it down, I was just saying it.
The fact, and it is true, especially more for England than here. You know, I'm not saying that we're better or greater or comparing us with Jesus Christ as a person or God as a thing or whatever it is. You know, I just said what I said and it was wrong or was taken wrong, and now it's all this.
There have even been threats against your life. There have been record burnings. You've been banned from some radio stations. Does this bother you?
Well, it worries me.
Yeah, you know, it's bound to bother us.
Do you think you're being crucified?
No, I wouldn't say that at all.
I suppose one of the key moments in the Beatles' career was when they made the decision to stop touring and doing live shows, give that up, and concentrate on writing and recording in the studio. And I suppose that really came about, they were forced into it really, because their life as sort of world statesmen had become intolerable, because if they were going abroad they would be welcomed as figureheads and almost like statesmen from Britain. And people wanted a piece of the action, they wanted to meet them and see them. But at least this sort of retreat from live shows meant that they could really get down to what they did best at this point, and that was concentrating on writing.
Doesn't have a point of view.
1965 was the year the Beatles discovered drugs, mind-expanding drugs in a big way, and they spent most of that year listening to Bob Dylan under the influence of mind-expanding drugs, and they hung out with him in London, and they met people like the beat poet Allen Ginsberg. And so, all in all, they started to think we should be doing more with our songwriting than we are at the moment. And the results of that are on Rubber Soul, where you actually get them trying to stand outside themselves and then look back at their own experience in a self-consciously artistic way for the first time. They weren't just writing pop songs, they were writing songs for themselves, about themselves.
With Nowhere Man, this came after John had a writer's block. He was sitting trying to write a song and he couldn't. And he tried for 5 hours and he just couldn't come up with anything. So after 5 hours of furious trying to think, he just lay down. And as he lay down to have a rest, suddenly it popped into his mind and he wrote Nowhere Man straight away.
It comes across at the time as amongst a small cluster of very articulate songs that were written at the time by other artists that were about life and society of the time. It's questioning things, although in a general way. That thing of like Matthew and Son, or some of the Kinks songs just about the nothingness of going to work, doing your 9 to 5, questioning what that's about in pop music for the first time. So there is that about it, but then of course it's actually about the feeling inside, and Lennon has said about it exactly, I think, what we felt about it at the time, which is that it is about John Lennon and his feelings of dislocation from that life he was leading, that he was asking for help about a year before.
He's as blind as he can be, just sees what he wants to see.
One of the things that's interesting about Nowhere Man is that it's an observational song. Now, this distinction between whether a singer is involved in the situation that they're singing about or whether they're simply observing it is something that I think is very important in the subsequent history of popular music. But up to about 1965, there weren't really any observational songs. That was an approach that people didn't think of taking. You were normally describing your own presence within a situation. But that's not the case with Nowhere Man. You're presented with somebody sort of from the outside, and then rather neatly at the end, you're tied in with this. Isn't he a bit like you and me? You know, you thought you were simply observing something that didn't actually make any calls on you. And then all of a sudden you are presented with the possibility of re-evaluating yourself in the context of that song.
What makes it sweet to listen to in a way is the harmonies. There's harmony vocals all the way through, but it's not sweet to listen to. It's very, very melancholy. And it was part of Rubber Soul, which there was an emphasis on the swing more to the acoustic side of their playing, acoustic guitars. It was quieter, a lot going on in the music, but it was quieter and more ruminative, and definitely on the sour side of sweet on many of the tracks, and that was a small masterwork, I think, Nowhere Man.
Making all his nowhere plans for nobody. Making all his nowhere plans for nobody.
It's certainly not true that the Beatles invented psychedelia. They were definitely responding to what was happening in America and what was happening at home, with bands like the Pink Floyd starting out, and also to the experiments that both John and Paul were making at home with home recordings. By the end of '65, I think both John and Paul had home studios, and they discovered that you could mess around with tapes and make interesting noises and and they were starting to play with collages and also play with film at the same time. So their minds were being expanded in more ways than drugs. They were getting all sorts of artistic influences.
The sort of genius of Lennon and McCartney is that they were able to sort of get this creative well from inside them. I mean, with John, he was always looking for it, always seeking it. He started off by what we call a pint of reality, having alcohol to spur on his creativity. Then he went on to all the tablets, Preludin and Captagon and things like that. Then he went on to everything from the mysticism with the Maharishi. Then he went on to Primal Scream. Then he was on to LSD. But he was always trying to seek all the time. With Paul, it came easy. Paul just sat down and wrote. But with John, he was always seeking, always striving. And you can tell the difference in their material.
Let me take you down, 'cause I'm going to strawberry fields. Nothing is real, and nothing to get hung about. Strawberry fields forever.
Because it was so international, it was impossible to go and do all those promo things, and because of the lack of security that existed at the time of, and also every fan in the world wanting the record the day it was released, you couldn't stagger it, and the Beatles could not physically go to Australia and be in Japan and England and America at the same time. We just decided, Brian and probably Paul, decided, let's make a little film of the records, and we'll just send them a film.
Let me take you down, 'cause I'm going to strawberry fields.
I mean, the best one we ever did was Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields. Which were, they were just like, they were the real forerunners of the MTV, the movie promo. We're filming in 35mm, no miming, just Beatles doing silly things, and it's like making proper little movies. 3 days shooting cost all of £1,000.
Tune in, but it's all right. That is, I think it's not too bad. Let me take you down, 'cause I'm going to strawberry fields. Nothing is real, and nothing to get hung about. Strawberry fields forever.
Strawberry Fields Forever is one of the better of the best tracks. It was inspired by Lennon's sort of childhood or youthful memories of going with his auntie to Strawberry Fields, which was a kind of Salvation Army orphanage building. But this is all mixed in with all kinds of psychedelic imagery and so forth, and jumbled up together. It's influenced by surrealism, and Lennon was influenced by Bob Dylan and Spike Milligan and people who messed around with language and tried it out to see how elastic it could be. So it's always very hard to kind of definitively say what does this song mean, because with surrealism some of the stuff is just in there to play with words and to contradict itself. But certainly the chorus refers to a sort of a longing for childhood innocence and childhood happiness, which he felt he had had at Strawberry Fields.
Strawberry fields forever. Strawberry fields forever. Strawberry fields forever.
Well, it's kind of informed wisdom, really, to say, isn't it, that Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band is the Beatles' masterpiece. And certainly it was viewed that way at the time. I remember when I first heard it in 1967 being pretty stunned by the whole, not just the range of songs and ideas, but the way that they linked them as well. I mean, this was George Martin's work, I guess, really, trying to create something that was like an orchestral theme, really. It's the closest they got to writing a big orchestral piece. It's a shame. I always thought that Sgt. Pepper was actually incomplete. I thought that they hadn't really finished what they set out to do, which was to write one big piece of music.
Picture yourself in a boat on a river with tangerine trees and marmalade skies. Somebody calls you, you answer quite slowly. A girl with kaleidoscope eyes.
Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds was inspired when Lennon asked his 3 or 4-year-old boy at that time, Julian, what his school painting or his childhood painting was, and Julian just exactly said that words. It's Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, which is his friend Lucy at the time. Now, of course, everyone thinks this is a druggy song to this day, and maybe Lennon played on that in a way. So it's become a kind of psychedelic anthem, if you like, with, as ever, a fantastically strong chorus.
Train in a station with plasticine pauses with looking glass ties. Suddenly someone is there at the turnstile, the girl with kaleidoscope eyes.
I think as a whole, because it was more of a concept record, it was a masterpiece. Nobody had done that before, and certainly nobody had started making such a big sounding record on a 4-track tape machine, and then eventually being able to overdub stuff by using other tape machines and locking tape machines together. These were things that had never been done before. So it was a masterpiece, most definitely from that point of view. And as a concept record, which had never been made before, yes, it was brilliant. Rubber Soul and Revolver, I think in some ways are probably stronger records. But if you say what was their masterpiece, I would have to say it would be Sgt. Pepper's, because it also captured the era.
Well, the Magical Mystery Tour, which was also in the summer of '67, represented the Beatles breaking free again and doing their own thing, actually making their own film this time. And they tried really hard to make it original and clever, but it didn't really work as a film. But the music was terrific, I thought. The actual roll-up for the Magical Mystery Tour theme was very exciting, and yeah, it was a celebratory kind of feel to it. Of course, it was after Brian Epstein had died, and the band was sort of cutting loose and doing their own thing, making the first sort of cracks in their relationship with their public, I suppose, because maybe it was a step too far.
The standout track is I Am the Walrus. It isn't really an orthodox song at all, except that its basic inspiration was by a record by the Miracles, a sort of Tamla Motown song, in the line, I'm crying. The rest of it, the lyrics were formed mainly by chance operation, and read as lyrics, per se, they don't necessarily make a lot of sense. But, in context, you have to remember that music is the most abstract of art, and it's not really anything to do with literal meaning at all. It's to do with something more intangible. And, I think that it's the general sort of mood that I Am the Walrus creates, I think. And the fact is that it is very much reflective of that time.
The lyrics to that, written by Lennon, are extraordinary, really. Semolina custard dripping from a dead dog's eye. It's pretty strange stuff, but it's real psychedelic stuff. But yet, regardless of that, the lyrical content is weird but strong. But the musical thing is fantastic, all these sort of slightly odd cellos playing in the background. It's great, Their strength was music.
let your knickers down. I am the Eggman. They are the Eggmen. I am the walrus. Cuckoo-cuckoo.
It's really hard to deny that there are any drug references in this one. The drug references are fairly blatant, I guess. But also there's lots of just plain surrealism, you know, influenced by Salvador Dali perhaps, and Buñuel, the filmmaker, with the sort of stuff about eyeballs and all kind of creepy, you know, sort of Louis Buñuel stuff that was in there. Yeah, there's something quite sneering and nasty about it, but Lennon had that quality to him which lots of people admire him for. But it does perhaps accentuate the sort of contrast or light and shade between perhaps McCartney's tendency towards pretty songs and beauty, and Lennon's tendency towards kind of cynicism and criticism.
I think the White Album might be the greatest rock album of all time. Not necessarily my favourite, but I can't think of anything else that has so many different styles, so much pizzazz, so much innovation, so much intelligence, so much fun, so much pain, so much pleasure, all across 30 songs, 90 minutes of music. And okay, at the time George Martin said he wished that he could have compressed the record and made one great album out of it. But I think it actually works better as a sprawling monster of a record with 30 songs. John Lennon writing from India, where he's supposed to be having a transcendental time with the Maharishi, you know, reaching high plateaus of mental awareness, and he's writing, "I'm so tired, I'm so upset, I'm so miserable." Fascinating songs that reveal a lot about the Beatles, and also in musical terms, they almost act like a history of popular music up to that point. There's bits of jazz in there, there's musical, there's country, there's bits of folk. Every different pop star you can imagine, and then towards the end you get Revolution 9, which is a sort of avant-garde soundscape of what John thought the revolution might sound like if it came. So you've got the past, the present and the future all on one amazing record.
Black cloud crossed my mind, blue mist round my soul, feel so suicidal, even hate my rock and roll. I'm lonely, wanna die.
When the Beatles were, quote, making their records, and people always presumed that there either George Martin or some man was solely responsible or not or whatever. And when each of us started producing our own records, or we took over our own recording sessions, people still couldn't believe that the artist could actually A, write the song and sing it, and possibly go in the studio and make it too. And I went through, and I'm sure many musicians went through the same game, which is the mystique of this board here, which is nothing but a tape recorder with a lot of arms on it. And, you know, it's just a matter of telling the engineer what you want. It all comes down to the musician's ear.
Here come old black dog, come grooving up slowly. He got juju, I'm all he wants. Hurry, roll, he got head down to me. Got to be a joker, he just do what he please.
With Abbey Road, you could say that perhaps the novelty had worn off a bit. You know, The first flash of excitement was well in the past now. It was much more like hard work, I guess, producing songs to order. And the end was in sight for the Beatles. And so, although I still wouldn't say they'd run out of steam as writers, perhaps it was becoming slightly evident that it was more of a chore, really. It was less a kind of inspiration, sort of less intuitive. You know, they were actually thinking about it rather more. It wasn't coming bursting out unbidden in spouts of creativity. I think that you get the feeling that they were actually having to work a little harder at it with that album.
I think that Abbey Road is consistently underrated. It may not have had the sociological impact of Sgt. Pepper, it may not be as rebellious as the White Album, and it may not have the melancholy of the last album that Let It Be has, but Abbey Road has just about everything you ever think you want from the Beatles. It has pop, it has rock, it has beautiful ballads, and then it has the sort of Baroque over-the-top climax of side 2, which is pretty much a suite of stuff linked together by the genius of George Martin, which has more brilliant moments in it than most people have on 4 albums.
Well, Let It Be was rather sad occasion, really, wasn't it? Because the Beatles had been through personal problems and business problems. They had all these arguments that were going on in the background that the public probably didn't know much about and couldn't really understand. And the Beatles themselves had suddenly reappeared with their moustaches and looking older and rather tired after all those years of excitement and adventure and thrills. And reached the point where it was becoming a burden on them, I think. So that was reflected in Let It Be, where you actually, in the film, where you see them arguing the toss and not being happy Beatles anymore.
Images of broken light which dance before me like a million eyes. They call me on and on across the universe. Put them down. Thoughts meander like a restless wind inside a letterbox. They tumble blindly as they make their way across the universe.
What was supposed to be a live record of what the Beatles really did sound like, as John Lennon said, with our trousers down, got perverted as a concept. Now, the other main problem with Let It Be is that John Lennon was on heroin at the time. And so his creative input was virtually nil. If you listen back to the recording tapes for the sessions, the number of times you can hear Paul McCartney saying to John, have you got anything? Have you got anything to offer? And John just doesn't say anything. Yoko answers on his behalf. Or George will come up with a new song. I mean, George was coming in with a good new song almost every day at that point. And he'd play it to John, who'd just go, oh, that's boring, and start playing an old 12-bar blues song instead. So when you've got the person who has been effectively the leader of the group saying, I don't care anymore, I'd rather take drugs than play music with you, it's very hard to get a cohesive album out of that situation.
A shame it had to end like that, really. But even at the end, the Beatles were still making great records and still producing thoughtful pieces of music, timeless pieces of music.
A lot of people in America still don't really understand why it all ended. 1,000,001 rumors, conflicting stories. If you had to make one statement as to what busted up the Beatles, what ended it, what would you say?
Because we all had basically had enough. and nobody knew how to say it. And we mightn't even have been aware that we'd had enough ourselves. You know, that's why I say maybe we should have finished it a bit sooner.
John was the strength and the kind of rebellious sort of element in the Beatles. So all of that was reflected in his writing, of course. So, but as a musician, I mean, he knew exactly what he wanted and provided the focus and clarity to the Beatles' music, I think.
Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us. Above us only sky.
I don't think with Lennon we were ever faced with somebody who said, right, I know what I'm doing, I've done it, this is my achievement. It was always sort of equivocal, which makes it somehow acceptable.
Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do.
Lennon was very influenced by Dylan, so that sneering nasal tone he has in his voice, that kind of nasty kind of finger-pointing aspect, perhaps was influenced by Dylan, who he did kind of hero worship a little bit.
Lennon tended to write from his experiences or ideas, you know, seeing something in a newspaper, something on TV, he would then have an idea for a song. He might have had a melody beforehand, you know, so a bit more social comment coming from them then.
You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will live as one.
His strengths were his weaknesses. I mean, the two sides of the same coin quite frequently. He knew what he wanted, and that is very important. I mean, he had a clear vision, even where that extended to the sense of hating the sound of his own voice. He knew that he didn't like to sound like John Lennon sounded, so he put Martin through all sorts of hoops, trying to change the sound of his voice, not to disguise it, but to make it something that I think he would be interested in hearing, because the last thing we like to hear is the sound of our own voice.
Imagine all the people sharing all the world. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will live as one.
Since the split, each one of the Beatles has gone his own way and has enjoyed a tremendous amount of popularity, but still the question, will they ever team up again?
It's quite possible, yes. I don't know why the hell we'd do it, but it's possible.
Would you like that to happen?
If it happens, I'll enjoy it.
Would you want to initiate that happening?
Well, I couldn't say.
If you could, I mean, is it something you would like to see yourself doing?
If I could. I don't know, Ellie, because you know me, I go on instinct, and if the idea hit me tomorrow, you know, I might call them and say, come on, let's do something. And so I couldn't really tell you. If it happens, it'll happen, you know.
So it is not something that you would totally rule out as never taking place again?
No, no, my memories are now all fond and the wounds are healed, and if we do it, we do it. If we record, we record. I don't know. As long as we make music, you know.
When John was shot, I mean, it was just awful. And, I just had a phone call at 4 o'clock in the morning or something like that. Mr. Bramwell? I said, yes. It's ABC News here. John Lennon's dead. What do you think of it? And it was just, excuse me. And it was dreadful, a dreadful period.